politicians. And get exclusive interviews.
She asked you a question and you are going for your diplomatic relationship somewhere else.
Plus, have an opportunity to learn interesting facts about different countries. Join us every weekday, 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. on Worldview, only on KTN News.
From the Kenyan coast, I am Francis Ontomwa, and this is KTN News.
This is KTN News.
Welcome back to Checkpoint. We're glad you are still with us. We're focusing on corruption here, and not just at the county level, at the national level, at all levels. And we want to have that conversation now. Joining me tonight on the show is the CEO of Inuka Trust, John Githongo, a face that is known very well in this country in the war on graft. Thank you for making the time to be with us on Checkpoint. So I'd like to start off by asking whether corruption is really on the rise, particularly in this administration, or if it's a perception, or perhaps we're just reporting about it more, analyzing it more. What's your sense with corruption under this administration and, over the last couple of years?
My own sense, I've been involved in anti-corruption for about a decade now, 2 decades now. Corruption's never been worse in Kenya. And one has to keep in mind that corruption is 50% perception. It's a corruption that when you're asked for a bribe, or when you have to pay a bribe to get a document that you experience on a day-to-day basis that informs your attitude towards it. And across the country, there's this feeling that we have a very permissive climate that has been allowed by our leaders for, I wouldn't actually call it corruption anymore. It's plunder, where with impunity, people in positions of public trust, and it's now even in the private sector, people are involving themselves in theft of public funds. We call it corruption, but if you look at some of the scandals that you have been reporting about on KTN, that's not really corruption. It's blatant, outright theft, where people are basically going into government budgets and extracting resources, confident that actually nothing's going to happen. It will be reported on KTN, in the newspapers. We'll make some noise about it. We'll talk about it on Twitter. But actually, at the end of the day, people go to court, they bounce from one court to the other, and then the thing will finish there. And this sense of impunity has never been this bad. Those who research corruption, the different civil society and other research organizations that focus on this issue also indicate that it's never been this bad in Kenya, and that attitudes of Kenyans with regard to corruption have never been this bad. So that's why I'm very clear that it's never been this bad. From what I can see, also what I read and what I'm told by the experts.
Now, on many occasions, you've said the president is not believable, in the fight against corruption. But, others beg to disagree and say, look, he's done quite a bit. When those allegations of corruption against members of his cabinet, we saw unprecedented persons, being interdicted, and, several of them are still in court facing charges on that. That is ensured the agencies have the resources that they've asked for. Is this really about the president? And, what more can he possibly do if he has not done enough? Some say he's done all he could do. At State House, we now remember that famous, or is it an infamous statement of, sasa nifanye nini, because he talked about his frustrations. So is it about him? If so, what more can he do to prove to Kenyans or to you that he's, committed to the war on corruption?
That was an unfortunate statement by His Excellency the President, for him to demonstrate his despair to the Kenyan people about something that he has claimed to take so seriously, and to do it publicly in that sort of way. He is the president, the elected, he's the sworn leader of this country. And so for him to take that kind of position is unfortunate. What's clear is two things. Number one, we've gone through about 20 years in Kenya of a lot of trying to fix corruption using technical reform, policy reform. So lots of task forces, lots of multi-stakeholder meetings, lots of reports have been published, lots of commissions have been established, different organs of government have been created, lots of benchmarking with what other people are doing in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Our anti-corruption authorities in their various permutations have been everywhere. Recently, the Attorney General was even in China, seeing what they're doing in China. So we've reached the glass ceiling in terms of what we can do within our constitution in terms of technical fixes for corruption. What is required is basically the political will to drive it. And I think that's where both President and the Deputy President, despite all the rhetoric that they put out, are failing. And the failure, in my opinion, can be fixed fairly quickly. President is a person of great political capacity. He's got the political skills to reach where he has reached. So I'm sure he can turn it around. Kenyans don't believe him. When the deputy...
Why don't they, though?
Well, I'll explain that. Same thing with the Deputy President. Deputy President says, we are going to fight corruption. People laugh. Kenyans laugh. Why? Why is this? And I think that this needs to be fixed by what they do themselves. I think that we need to reach a point where issues of conflict of interest amongst the President, Deputy President, Cabinet Secretaries, Principal Secretaries, and other senior officials are dealt with fairly quickly, that the business interests of these individuals, their families, their wives and children, sisters and brothers, are subjected to a thorough audit, because most of our politicians at the top level, even in the opposition, are business people at the same time and are doing business with government. And that's where it's a slippery slope into people getting involved in kind of scandals that we've been reading about at the Devolution Ministry, NYS, Ministry of Health, and the like. And because of that, people don't believe. You say, these people are talking, but quietly we know people close to them wanapora mali. Not just involved in corruption, but looting public coffers.
All right, so let me put you on the spot. Civil society groups have raised issues with the president, what's happening at the national level, but it's said that you do not apply the same fervor to what's happening at the county level. And perhaps, in places where, we see the opposition is not the opposition in counties that are run by court governors. And that is what we're highlighting, over the next couple of days, now a month now, with 47 days of accountability. And some say civil society is very quick to talk about what the president should not be doing, but we do not hold, others to the same standard. We do not hold court leader Raila Odinga and, his co-principals to the same standard, and that this is happening not just at the national level, but everywhere.
It's happening. I mean, I think they're all held to the same standard. And, when I talk about issues of conflict of interest and taking, because we need to return some legitimacy and credibility to these people. They are our leaders. And that's lost now. There's been a degradation of public trust in them and what they say about this particular issue. And what you do to return that public confidence are the kind of measures that I was talking about. Now, when you go to the counties, we've also devolved corruption. And therefore, we have corruption at the county level that you've been reporting very ably. I think civil societies very involved at that level as well, and in fact has had a bit more cooperation than at the national level.
In what sense?
In that civil society organizations are able to work in counties and conduct social audits with together with county officials and leaders. Slightly more easy. It's more easy in some counties than in others, but that doesn't mean that we don't take seriously the fact that there is corruption at that level. And I think it's important that the issue is being raised, not only with regard to the counties, but also the opposition. there's another thing that's interesting about the counties, and I'm sure you've reported this yourself, and I've seen it in the print press, of senior county officials being held to account by ordinary wananchi on the ground very directly. We had in Kisumu recently, I think it was a member of the county assembly whose home was burned down, and he was accused of corruption by the local community. We had in Embu some months ago photographs published in the papers of the speaker flying over a fence because he was being chased by citizens who were unhappy about the non-payment of contractors. So there's a sense of local accountability in the counties that doesn't exist at the national level. And that is something which is, I think, a positive development, and one which makes life a bit easier, even when civil society is engaging at that level.
Okay, I know you've talked about, a lot of the collaboration that's happening. But have we had some serious press conferences from members of civil society to say, hey, Raila, what's happening in areas of CORD, or hey, Governor so-and-so in these areas? Because like you mentioned, corruption is a perception, so is the fight against it. And some would say, civil society is hell-bent on painting the national government in one light, but not raising the same levels on the other. Talking about the cooperation that you are talking about. But, just to be extremely, more outspoken, or as outspoken as we see with what's happening with NYS devolution, for example?
First of all, Yvonne, I mean, if billions of dollars of Kenyan taxpayers' money are disappearing or can't be accounted for by national government, it's a responsibility of responsible citizens, not even just civil society organizations, to take that extremely seriously. When you look at the level of debt that has been accumulated in this country, both foreign and domestic debt by national government, it's unprecedented. We've never had this kind of situation before. So I think it is extremely serious. The issues that I raised with regard to accountability and the kind of measures that can be taken apply to everybody. If you look in the opposition and you look in national government and look at the top leadership, they've all been in each other's parties at one point or the other. They've all been in the same boat, and it's sort of hopping from one boat to the other. So when one talks of leadership, one is talking about them all, but then one focuses one's attention at the place where you can see the greatest harm is being done before our own eyes, and at tremendous speed, at a speed that we have never seen before in our country. Even if you just look at just a foreign debt, its accumulation and the sense in which it has been looted from public coffers, that is something that is an emergency that requires urgent attention. So one doesn't dodge the fact that there is corruption also amongst the opposition. Yeah. The fact is, the opposition doesn't have the capacity is not in government, so they don't spend that much.
But surely they should have to be able to exhibit an intolerance to corruption.
Absolutely.
Even at their level, in their own small way.
Absolutely.
Perhaps, summon a governor to the party headquarters and say, we've looked at the Auditor General's reports and there's some mischief happening here, but we've not seen that.
In their own counties. In their own counties. And I think that that's an issue which has to be taken seriously. You've also had members of the opposition who've been mentioned with regard to some of the major scandals.
Absolutely.
And so one would like to see the kind of action that has been taken with regard to the national government, taken with regard to the opposition as well. My own sense is when I look at, for example, what has happened in Kilifi, where in fairly quick action was taken by the governor there when evidence of corruption was brought to light. That's a positive development, and so you have positive developments taking place also in some of the Jubilee counties. Mm-hmm. So and you've been going around all the different counties, and I'm sure you found that across the board you have good ones and bad ones in the opposition and in the ruling party. So it's not as if one is
or similar issues even across the countries, regardless of that. Yeah, I'd like to stay with the counties for just a moment before we move on. You know, what's your sense? Because you mentioned civil society has been working with, you know, the county governments. What's your sense? Some people say, look, it might not necessarily be willful theft, but it just could be a serious issue when it comes to capacity towards, you know, the audit process and following that, the Public Finance Management Act, the government regulations on finance, the SRC regulations, for example, as regards sittings and, you know, how the audit process works and that sort of thing. Do you get the sense that it's a capacity problem? If so, what are we doing about it? Or is this proper outright willful theft and circumnavigation of the rules?
You have a bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, devolution is new. The capacity in the counties, even county leaders themselves, and governors, have actually at a point raised issues that, you know, we have deficiencies, major deficiencies, and so they have had leakages and corruption that takes place. And when one investigates it, you know, one can see that there are cases of tremendous incompetence in the way money is allocated, spent, and accounted for. And that is not perhaps so surprising when one considers that this is new to Kenya, and we're asking these units to spend huge sums of money.
Yeah. They previously didn't have with the municipal councils and the county councils.
Exactly. Huge sums of money in a fairly short period of time. There's political pressure to deliver. So the sense is, okay, let's just spend and show that something is happening. In that process, the auditor will find that a lot of mistakes have been done, and also a lot of theft has taken place. Yeah. And one of the positive things that is happening is that is coming to light, that we can now engage with.
All right, who do you think is championing the war on graft at the moment? I mean, you've rightly said here, persons from both sides of the political divide are being implicated. In fact, the Standard on Sunday today, you know, had that headline talking about, you know, 273 out of 290 legislators, you know, embroiled in this CDF scam, if you like. It involves members of both sides of the political divide, others that many would not have expected, who came in perhaps with the promise from the religious sector, with the promise of, you know, sort of cleaning up the politics. So do you get a sense that this is being led by anyone? Is there one person who we can say, this is the champion, this is who we rally behind? Or are we just all groping in the dark and everybody, you know, for himself?
In a country like ours, one would expect to be able to rally behind the top leadership, those you've elected to the top leadership, around an issue that is as urgent and as massive, both economically and politically. You'd expect the top leadership to be the ones to lead it. Clearly they're not. We have a culture of impunity and permissiveness that has spread throughout the country, that I talked to you about, that I mentioned earlier. And that has created this environment where people feel they can't get away with anything. That we have appropriated, for example, a term, which is a South African term, of the tenderpreneur. We didn't talk about tenderpreneurs 8 years ago, or 5 years ago. Yeah. It's coming. It's a South African term of people who have got no fixed capacity or ability. What they do is they broker and trade in relationships to get contracts to basically extract resources from or public resources, whether it's at the county or national level, which they just steal, and nothing really happens to them. And the whole process of being investigated, being taken to court, unfortunately also has become theatre. It no longer has the kind of legitimacy and credibility in the eyes of Kenyans. So Kenyans see somebody's being taken to court for ABCD. You know, they dismiss that. They say, we know nothing's going to happen. And that kind of cynicism is the thing that leadership helps to stop. Look at a country, and this is an issue that has been raised and has caused controversy. Look at a country like Tanzania. New president, no grand strategy, big policy reform agenda, just basically goes out and deals with the issue directly. And what that does is inspire our population just inspire ordinary citizens whose attitude towards this issue therefore changes. That creates an environment in which the policies can then work.
It's interesting that you mentioned, President Magufuli, because there's some that take issue with the manner in which he is dealing with corruption, that it's a one-man show, that it is not constitutional, that he is not perhaps strengthening institutions, structures, and systems that will outlive his administration. And so some say that's probably not the way to go, and that we have structures and institutions through which President Uhuru Kenyatta, his counterpart, has worked through and is perhaps receiving some sort of, frustration. Because he talked about the judiciary, the police, and that's something that they say civil society isn't talking about, some of the gaps we have within the police, within the judiciary, where all of these cases go and, they're not prosecuted, we don't see convictions. Surely the president has no control over what happens in the courts.
Yvonne, you buy a car, you choose it, you buy it, you start it, you're the one who has to drive it, and you have to make it work, and you do what it takes to make that car work. We fight this battle with what we have. And yes, there are criticisms that have been raised with regard to the institutionalization of the fight in places like Tanzania. But we've seen public confidence with regard to what the president is doing there remaining quite high. The same thing applied to President Sankara in Burkina Faso. The same thing applied to President Nyerere in Tanzania. They had another quality that was extremely important in terms of ordinary, and this is a very African thing. If Africans believe that if you're a president or prime minister or deputy president or prime minister or whatever, if you're a top leader, and ordinary Africans believe that you're a thief, not corrupt is a bit of an abstract word, that you're a thief, and that your family is also got thieves there, that you're involved in theft, or you're allowing them to steal, then even the institutions that your own people lead don't function, because people know that a climate has been created that allows them to get away with this. And that when you look at the one single characteristic amongst all these leaders, whether from West Africa to East Africa to President Mandela in South Africa, individually, you could not point to what they stole or what they allowed their families to steal. And that is extremely important for that to be dealt with, which is the reason I raised the issue of we've got to deal with this conflict of interest matter that has emerged under this administration that affects, I think, all the political leadership, whether it's in those who are in power and those that are in the opposition, because it degrades public confidence in their leaders tremendously.
And so you're tying this degradation of public confidence to the work of the judiciary, to the work of the police. What are the inefficiencies in that system, in those areas, along this chain of the war on graft?
I think if one looks at Kenya's entire judicial chain from the Supreme Court down to the prisons, more reform work has been done in Kenya since 1991 in all those institutions, whether the DPP's office, creating the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We're in the fourth permutation of it right now. Yeah. We've created and transformed so many institutions. We were, I think, second or third country in the world to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We ratified the African Union Convention Against Corruption. In terms of creating the institutions, the body of laws, we've done extremely well, and we've been quick to do it. But in terms of doing what it takes to inculcate in ourselves a culture, traditions, norms that affect the way we behave with regard to positions of public trust, we've gone in the opposite direction. Yeah, and that's why I said that we've reached more or less the limit in terms of this public sector reform model, and that it requires a political action to give it.
You've talked about the commissions. We've seen them all. Yeah. Kenya AntiCorruption Authority, the Kenya AntiCorruption Commission. None of the persons that have been at the helm of these anti-corruption agencies, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission that we have now, have lived to see any success. Do we need a commission? A specific one that fights graft? Corruption is an economic crime. Surely can't the CID not investigate, the DPP prosecutes, and we just, get this over and done with? Is it necessary, a commission on graft?
Well, it was felt to be necessary, and from my position in civil society in the early 1990s, I was a big proponent of us creating specialized anti-corruption bodies, changing the anti-corruption law, Chapter 65, and creating a more robust piece of legislation that defined economic crimes more specifically.
And trying to make it about ethics, that traditional that you're talking about, which is why we call it now the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
And which if we are done, I think we have to accept that we have made some mistakes, and sometimes that's quite difficult.
What mistakes?
And I think, though, for me, one mistake that we made was the reason we created these, it was then the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, became Anti-Corruption Police Unit, Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority, etc. It's got 4 different permutations. Now, the reason we created it is because the Office of the Attorney General, the State Law Office, which included the DPP, the Prosecutions Department, were not prosecuting, and the police were not investigating. And therefore we said, now this becomes such a problem, we're going to create a specialized institution.
Right, where you can channel resources, energy, ideas, effort,
So we sort of went around the problem. Whereas maybe what we should have done is concentrate our attention, energy, and political will and capital at the time in fixing the Attorney General's office, in fixing the police, to ensure that they're able to deal with these issues. We're still going to have to do it now. We're still going to have to fix some of these institutions. So I think that's an important lesson.
So do we fix the commission, or do we just do away with it?
It's up to Kenyans. If it's not working, and if we should ask ourselves, if the police and the Attorney General's office and the DPP's office work properly, would we need this institution?
What do you think, John?
Well, I think it would become redundant. If these other institutions work, it would become redundant. But now, it's written into the Constitution, so it's a much more complex set of issues. However, we also wrote into law pieces of legislation that touched on ethics, and we haven't given enough energy to that. We've always pushed very hard for prosecution, frying the big fish. However, in Kenya, the big fish are the politicians running the country. And that's just the truth. And the big fish are in the top of our political lake in the whole political lineup. So you're not going to expect big fish to fry themselves.
Okay.
However, using the kind of ethics legislation that we have, I think it's possible to be able to use a kind of vetting that we've seen with the police, which it's a telling that hasn't been that effective. Lifestyle audits, ensuring that we do audits of the top leaders and their families, because that's causing a sucking out of confidence in their. They talk about fighting corruption. You find people don't believe them. People don't trust them because of the perceived behavior of people around them. And we have the instruments to fix that in terms of the ethics-related legislation that is in place, and we haven't used it. Plus, again, I say, as Africans, the ethics-related instruments that we have are perhaps more culturally acceptable to us. People would much prefer to have the money that has been stolen from Kenyans paid back.
When we speak about ethics, because it's interesting, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one, because you were the permanent secretary in the Office of the President in charge of governance and ethics. So tell us, what was the magic then? There was a lot of euphoria, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of push for accountability, for good governance, for transparency, and you were at the heart of that, really, based in State House. What was the magic then? When did we lose it? And how do we get that magic back? Maybe, this is a twofold question. What did we lose? How do we get it back? And what are the solutions going forward as we conclude our discussion?
I think the magic then was the different political parties in the opposition had come together around an anti-corruption platform They had been elected with a significant majority. We'd had a peaceful transition of power, and ordinary Kenyans were extremely excited and supportive of the government's efforts to fight corruption. So really, the real energy to fight corruption in the first 8 months of the Kibaki regime came from the people. In fact, when I was in office as permanent secretary, one of my first challenges was dealing with provincial police officers around the country telephoning because ordinary Kenyans were arresting policemen who were asking for bribes. And they would arrest them and take them to the police station. And so these PPOs would call to ask, okay, what do we do? I said, yeah, you prosecute them. So that kind of ground up fight against corruption, that was the magic that we had. That's what allowed us to achieve what we did in those
Kenyans don't have that magic anymore? Why? Where did they lose it?
Deep cynicism. First of all, as the politicians lied, leaders lied, number one. Number two, reformers, people that you and I and others looked up to as people maybe who have been in civil society, in the church and other places, as people of integrity who are going to be beacons of good governance and ethics and the way in public affairs are run. Just to put it bluntly, they became crooks. They joined the gravy train. That's very disheartening when you see people that you knew, people who 10 years ago were shouting, we want transparency, accountability, mageuzi. And all they're doing is buying land, buying cars, marrying extra wives, etc., etc. And that's very disheartening. And ordinary people see that extremely quickly. Not only they see it, they feel it. Kenyans are an extremely interesting people in that.
So what do we do? Is there a silver bullet then? You're talking about it from the ground up.
Yeah.
So as we conclude, and I want to give you a minute or less if you can. I know there's no silver bullet, or is there? What is that one thing that would happen in this country at the top, at the bottom, in between, to start to, give us some success?
Well, I think two things immediately. First of all, the kind of concentrated attention by the media, like you are doing with your 47 days, by civil society. It would be good to get the churches back on board. It would be good for the private sector to also recover their credibility and be able to speak authoritatively about that. That I think is extremely, just keeping that pressure up is extremely important. Where we've reached in terms of a climate of wide-scale plunder and theft, it requires the top leadership